And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. It was September 12th, 1962. It was a really, really hot day that day. And the president's speech was held in a big outdoor stadium where there was not a single inch of shade for anyone who was sitting there listening to him. And that whole event ended up being a bit of an endurance test for the thousands of people who were in attendance, not only because of the unrelenting heat, but also because before the president eventually got up to give his speech, all these other people went first. The university president and a whole other cast of sort of lesser dignitaries all gave up, and they all gave fairly long remarks of their own, while all these thousands of people wilted in the stadium under the noonday sun, all before the president even started his remarks. But when the president did finally come up to the podium at the football stadium at Rice University in Houston, Texas, that hot September day in 1962, he, I think somewhat wisely, sort of recognized the environment he was in. He started off taking note of the setting he was in, the school, the city, the state, and then, frankly, the weight of the matter that he was about to discuss.
Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your president having made me an honorary visiting professor, and I will assure you that my first lecture will be very brief. I am delighted to be here, and I'm particularly delighted to be here on this occasion. We meet at a college noted for knowledge, in a city noted for progress, in a state noted for strength, and we stand in need of all three. For we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance.
That was the somewhat somber start before that very quiet crowd of what would eventually become recognized as one of the triumphant oratorical moments in U.S. presidential history. I mean, that was the quiet, somber start to the speech, in which JFK went on to inspire the nation to commit to move proverbial mountains, to do whatever needed to be done for America to become the first nation on earth, for Americans to lead humanity in putting a man on the moon. And that speech is remembered for its pinnacle moments of inspiring rhetoric, the stirring words from JFK. But it's interesting, when you go back to that speech now, what's really striking, given the legend of that moment in history, is that all the way up till the apex, the memorable apex of that speech, JFK, honestly, was barely dragging that audience along. This huge, sweaty stadium full of heat-struck Texans who had been sitting there for a long time before he ever got up there, they were really not all that into anything he was saying for any of the rest of his speech. But the one indelible stanza from that speech, the one historical moment, we can all right now, off the top of our heads, recite from memory, right? That moment with the crowd roaring and him crescendoing into this great memorable moment about America putting a man on the moon. You know, when you go back and look at it, turns out the way he got the crowd to roar in that moment was not because they seemed particularly psyched about going to the moon. Before he got to that point in the speech, the thing they were all making noise about at the start of that apex moment in the speech was that he had just made a comedic football reference about why Rice University even bothered to play Texas in football, given what a mismatch that always was.
There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
And then he sort of has the crowd with him there. Why does Rice play Texas? And the crowd wakes up and is like, yeah, Rice against Texas. Why does Rice play Texas? That's hard too, but we got to do the hard stuff, like go to the moon, right? Right? For all the rabbits that JFK had to pull out of the hat there, for everything he had to do to bring that crowd along, that tired, exhausted, hot crowd, to bring them along with him, because that speech did ultimately signal the public launch of an American effort that was extraordinary and unprecedented and triumphantly successful in the end. That speech, those words from JFK, they didn't just go down in history as an important moment in the JFK presidency. Those words went down in history as an important moment in the history of the U.S. presidency, in the history of this country, frankly, in the history of the world. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard, right? This iconic, indelible moment. Not just because it was a well-delivered line, but because in retrospect, in hindsight, looking back on that moment, we now know what JFK was setting in motion. He really was setting in motion, putting a man on the moon. And now here's the Trump administration version of that, which is happening right now. Vice President Mike Pence has just gone to the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama, and he has given what he clearly believes to be a rousing, momentous speech for the ages about us going back to the moon again. For the first time since 1972, we're going to put astronauts on the moon again.
We are going back to the moon.
It's just like JFK, right? Right, if Kennedy could make world history in 1962 with the "We choose to go to the moon" speech, clearly this is just as inspiring, right? Mike Pence saying, we are going back to the moon. Here's the thing. The reason JFK's speech in 1962 became an iconic moment in world history and will be remembered for the ages no matter whatever else ever happens on Earth is because Kennedy said, we choose to go to the moon, and he was actually choosing that we would go to the moon. And then we actually did it. In contrast, Vice President Mike Pence has just announced, we are going back to the moon. And he's done it like in JFK style. But the Trump administration actually has no plan to go back to the moon. And part of the reason we know this is because Mike Pence admitted it in another awkward part of his speech. Turns out he didn't make plans to go down to Alabama to announce that we're going back to the moon because he knew that we have some new plan to go back to the moon. In fact, he was just going there to give them a speech, and somebody told him, hey, maybe we could do that a couple minutes before he walked onto stage. And so he hoped announcing it would make him look like JFK, maybe?
Administrator Bridenstiner told me 5 minutes ago, we now have a plan to return to the moon.
Mike Pence only heard about this going back to the moon idea 5 minutes ago, but this speech sounds really good if you tuck that in there. And by the way, I should mention, when he says Administrator Bridenstiner told me 5 minutes ago we now have a plan to return to the moon, dude's name is not Bridenstiner. It's just Bridenstine. But you know, make sure you get my good side when you shoot this for the newsreels and the time capsules. This is what presidents and vice presidents are supposed to talk like, right? I mean, you could forgive the audience at Mike Pence's speech for believing that maybe this really was an announcement about something new that America was going to do, something that was going to happen. You might forgive them for thinking he was announcing that there was some new thing that was being unveiled in order to actually effectuate putting people back on the moon. But really, no. After Pence's speech, the NASA administrator, whose name is not Bridenstiner, he actually got up and tried to explain what could conceivably be a plan that might make good on what Mike Pence just said in this speech. He told the audience at Marshall Space Flight Center that maybe some of the way they could do it would be to accelerate work on part of the Space Launch System rocket that NASA has been working on for years. The part he said they were going to accelerate work on, I should tell you, is a specific NASA project that was just put on ice and stopped altogether in the Trump budget that was submitted 2 weeks ago. He also said another part of the astronauts back on the moon within 5 years plan would, of course, be a lunar lander program, which sounds amazing. It has not been funded at all by the Trump administration. They're not even working on it. They're not even getting that. Astrophysicist Katie Mack helpfully pointed out what the current administration might be missing about what it takes to be remembered for a JFK-style speech about going to the moon. As she points out, this is NASA's budget over time. Can we put got an arrow over there on the left? That shows where the NASA budget was, and you can see where it was going when Kennedy gave his landmark speech in 1962 saying, we're going back to the moon. You see what happened? After Kennedy made that announcement, looks like he actually had a plan to do something, right? And that's how we got to the moon. You can follow along here. I don't need to put an arrow on the right side of the graph to show you that's where the Trump administration has the NASA budget right now. But still, the speech sounds awesome. We'll go back to the moon. Please clap. NASA does not actually have a plan to get astronauts back on the moon in 5 years. They were hoping to do it by 2028. That's what they were already planning on doing. But Mike Pence has now announced, no, we're going right away. We're doing. There's no plan to do that at all. And this has happened often enough now that I think we can see how this works. I think we can see their mindset here. I think they think that if you just give the speech, if you just make the announcement, that's enough to get credit for it if people don't pay attention to the fact that you don't actually mean it. I mean, this just seems to be a recognizable pattern now, 2+ years into this new American political experience we are all having. I mean, announce we are going to the moon. Maybe people will think you are like JFK, who said we were going to the moon, but he meant it. Announce the denuclearization of North Korea. Yeah, make sure you get the handshake. It's like they don't know it's not historic, it's not an iconic moment if it's not real. But they want the announcement. They want what appears to be the big moment. And so we've had the announcement we're going to the moon. Just this week, we've had the announcement that North Korea is denuclearizing. We've had the announcement from the president that ISIS is defeated. ISIS is totally gone, which is an awesome thing to announce, regardless of whether, right? The president has also announced that there will now be health care for everyone. Everybody in America now has health insurance. He says the way it works is the hospitals will bill the government and the government will pay the bills. Everybody gets health care now. That's how it works now. The president made the announcement. The president not only announced, he actually signed a thing and said that the thing he was signing would require henceforth that only American-made steel would be used in U.S. pipelines. Look, he signed the thing. He made the announcement, summoned the cameras for the photo op, had people stand around him. There, in fact, is no requirement that U.S. steel be used in U.S. pipelines. He announced that he was doing that. That does not exist in real life. That is not at all what that signature meant on that piece of paper. He goes and he has these rallies in rural America and announces that he has established rural broadband across America. And everybody goes crazy because that sounds amazing, right? It does sound amazing. That would be a great thing to announce. Even better, it would be a great thing to do. But they're not actually working on doing it at all. They just have him announce it at his rural rallies because it sounds like a great thing to be able to announce. And I mean, we should have known it was going to be like this, right? When we got the initial White House announcements, right, about his record win in the Electoral College, which he didn't get, and the record crowd size at the inaugural. We should have known this would be the pattern. But I think we can all see the pattern now, right? And we should all be able to agree that the announcement of things the White House wishes to be true or wishes to be credited for should not be confused with actual things, with actual reality, actual plans, actual policies, actual things that may have come to pass. And I have received my share of grief over these last couple of years for my loose policy of not covering anything they say and instead only covering things they do. But since this week is we're going back to the moon, and also I have been totally exonerated by Robert Mueller, I'm going to stick with my policy for now, because what they say is not that helpful for understanding what's actually happened or is going to happen. It has now been 5 days since the report from Special Counsel Robert Mueller about the results and the findings of his year and 10-month-long investigation, since that report was delivered to the Justice Department. So far, that Mueller report has not been released to the public at all. The Trump administration has issued a brief characterization of Mueller's findings, written by Trump's newly appointed Attorney General. But if you don't want to count on what the Trump administration is saying about itself, and you actually want to see Mueller's findings on all of it, right? On the criminal side of it, on the counterintelligence side of it, on the collusion side of it, on the obstruction side of it, on all of it, we don't, at this point, even know how close we are to that. The chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, said he spoke with the Attorney General, William Barr, about that today, and he basically came away frustrated.
I had a phone call with the Attorney General, and I asked him about the length and breadth of the Mueller report. He told me it was a very substantial report, We cannot begin to do justice to. I asked him when we would see it, and he couldn't get specific. He said weeks, not months, as we've heard before. I asked whether he could commit that the full report, an unredacted full report with the underlying documents, evidence, would be provided to Congress and to the American people. And he said he wouldn't commit to that. He wouldn't make a commitment to that. I am very concerned about that.
How many pages is the report? When you say very substantial, do you mean hundreds of pages? How many pages?
I can't say that, but it's very substantial.
And you know how many pages it is?
Yes.
Fox News
it's
is
very
saying
substantial.
700.
What?
Fox News is saying 700. Is that accurate?
More than that?
I can't comment.
Why is that an issue?
Why is that confidential?
Because I was told, and I wasn't told that I could release that information. But it's very substantial.
Very substantial, less than 1,000.
Oh, I would think so. But
is it more than 500?
Did he say there was a counterintelligence component to this report?
We didn't talk about that.
It's very substantial. You can't say, you know how many pages, you can't say how many pages. Is it less than 1,000? I would think so. Is it more than 500? I'm not. That last point that he was asked about, did he say whether there was a counterintelligence component to this report? Nadler says we didn't talk about that. That's interesting. And it's a point, actually, that looms large right now. The Intelligence Committee Chairman, Adam Schiff, has been hitting this very hard, saying that even if Robert Mueller concluded in his investigation that criminal charges shouldn't be brought against the president or against anybody in his campaign for coordinating with the Russian government in that government's attack on the 2016 election, Schiff says, as far as the evidence he's seen, there was, broadly speaking, collusion between people associated with the president and Russia. And it is the counterintelligence part of Mueller's investigation that he says should shed light on this broader national security question of whether the president himself or people around him have been under the influence of or compromised by any hostile foreign power, Russia included. Until Mueller's findings are released, all we've got is Barr's assertions. All we've got is what they say about this report. We've got Barr's assertion that he, and not Robert Mueller, has decided that the president shouldn't be prosecuted for obstruction of justice. And we've got this narrowly tailored assertion, again, from Trump's newly appointed Attorney General, saying that there should be no American prosecutions for helping the Russian government with the 2016 election attack. But that's all we've got, is those assertions from the Trump administration thus far. In terms of what we can actually observe beyond what they're saying, well, today in federal court in Washington, there was a surprise. Today in federal court, the chief judge of the D.C. District Court unveiled a surprise about Mueller's grand jury and ongoing investigations involving foreign countries and the enforcement of subpoenas and potential forthcoming indictments. And it was unveiled in court today in a way that seemed to shock not only the reporters who were there in court to witness that hearing. That revelation today in court also seemed to shock some of the lawyers who are involved in that case and who are involved in that hearing today. And that story's next. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.